Welcome to episode 106 of the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce. I'm your co-host, Isaiah Bollinger. Unfortunately, Tim is unable to be with us. We've had a lot going on. We did our first live podcast in-person event only a couple days ago. So I think we've been a little overbooked than normal, but we're back to our regular schedule coming up. So we'll take a quick pause for our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance.
Thanks for tuning in, and we're super excited to have Ryan Lee, CEO and founder of Nautical Commerce, a marketplace commerce platform, built on kind of like a modern stack, which let me not ruin too much. You can explain it better than I can. We were definitely impressed by all the things you guys have done in such a short period of time. But Ryan, tell us a little bit about Nautical and also like your background before that. What made you think that this was a good idea to get into?
First of all, Isaiah, thank you for having me on the podcast. But we saw a real gap in the market. A lot of people were trying to tackle multi-vendor or marketplace technology by creating apps that usually sat in the periphery of other systems. And if you think about marketplace, it's not a side project. It is your business model. When you go down the path of embracing marketplace, it generally becomes your business model. And so you need an operating system that helps you run that marketplace, not an app that kind of sits on the periphery. And so when we built it, we had the luxury of doing it from first principles. And so, we built in a way that, to your point, is modern and really assists with the workflow of the modern marketplace operator.
Gotcha. And so at this point, you guys can, and obviously you guys do a lot with B2B, and I think it's pretty cool that you guys have a B2B commerce magazine, actually. So you can get the podcast and you can also get the Nautical B2B e-commerce magazine, which is it free or do you have to actually subscribe and pay, or?
No, you don't have to subscribe. It is free content, and the idea behind it is really bring together thought leaders across B2B that help people kind of navigate this new world, right, of embracing digitization in industries that have typically been very successful in an undigitized or even partially digitized way.
So you guys obviously realized fairly early on in this journey that there's an opportunity in B2B for marketplaces. I think everyone's familiar with, the Amazon marketplace and, to some degree, the Walmart marketplace and these other consumer marketplaces, Etsy and whatnot. I think the B2B space is a little bit kind of like behind the scenes. That's part of why we have this podcast. It's like hard to find good information about B2B commerce or how some of these distributors, manufacturers like actually even operate and what the inner workings are like, and especially trying to modernize with e-commerce. What did you guys realize within B2B, or what made you kind of say, hey, like this is the area that we should maybe focus on a little bit more than competitors or whatnot?
Yeah, Isaiah, I think, it was interesting because it was our backgrounds. Me and my co-founders came from, a supply chain management software background. We built, effectively a platform that helped enable private marketplaces and freight. And it is a big departure from B2C. I think the reason why the B2C players, specifically the software players, are struggling to get into this is because B2B is much more complex than B2C, just in payments alone, right? You've got to accept generally terms. You have to accept a variety of ways that the customer wants to pay. It's not, vanilla like, swiping a card or entering a card online, to make a purchase. It's generally on terms, credit limits, other kinds of things. And so, that's the reason why we looked at B2B as an incredible opportunity because of our experience, right? For the last decade, we've really been operating in a world where we are enabling, businesses to digitize their, businesses that were effectively marketplaces, but didn't really have software augmenting or creating efficiencies.
So one of the things we talked about offline is that marketplaces have actually been around for decades or maybe even hundreds of years. They just weren't called marketplaces. They're really just called distributors. And you could argue some retailers are kind of like a marketplace, right? And so, but I think distributors are kind of that interesting niche where there's a lot of money flowing through distributors, but most people through their average daily lives don't really see it. They don't really know how they work, or unless you actually worked at a distributor or worked with a distributor, you don't really know what's going on, right? So, what do you see as the need for distributors to, I guess, modernize their marketplace? Like if you think of the concept of a distributor as a marketplace I look at it as like a curated marketplace, right? They've chosen to pick, 10 or maybe 500, usually it's somewhere between like 10 and a few hundred vendors that they curate and they bring in their products into their repertoire to serve their customers. And then they essentially create a marketplace out of that. How do you see them? So there's a long-winded question. How do you see them moving into the future as what we see today as a marketplace?
Yeah, Isaiah, I'll start with first principles. If you really think about what technology is, it's a tool to make our lives easier and to create efficiency, right? Yeah. And I think, this concept of marketplacification or, digital transformation, it can be quite intimidating. And so, what we do is when we come in, we work with our partners, companies like Trellis and others, to kind of say, how do we do this in a way that helps the customer embrace digitization, even if that means starting in a crawl, walk, run way, right? And for me, this concept of embracing this technology shouldn't be intimidating, because at the end of the day, why is everybody excited about AI? They're excited about it because it's going to do mundane tasks that we don't want to do, that we, ultimately feel like are a waste of time. A system that helps orchestrate your core business's transactions, whether that's end to end or even in a partial way, makes you more efficient so that you can do what you've promised your customer, which is deliver the value that you deliver. Doing the actual transaction and, making sure that you're moving paperwork around, that's not what your customer paid you to do. Your customer paid you to deliver a good, a service, or a product. And, technology that helps you take care of, what I call the plumbing or, the housekeeping type work, really is value add, and should make you more efficient.
So explain to me how the marketplace functionality would help a distributor, I guess, become more efficient versus just why don't they just do what they're doing right now? Like, why don't they, why don't they just take everything over email and phone calls, right? And
well, you can't argue with what they've been doing now. It's been successful. I mean, these distributors have existed, to your point, in some circumstances, for a century or more. You're right. Distributors have been marketplaces, way before Silicon Valley and technology made marketplaces cool. The difference is that, it depends on the level of automation that you've introduced into that business model to allow yourself to scale, to allow yourself to become more profitable, right? And so, marketplace, bringing marketplace into a distributor's business model is all about finding ways that that's going to either A, reduce headcount, increase visibility, which, you know, is going to get you more orders, or increasing the breadth of your offerings. You know, to that point, Isaiah, you know, one of the I think hidden monetization opportunities for a lot of these distributors is the ecosystem that they've created around their businesses. I like to say right now, a lot of B2Bs are leaving money on the table because if you think about it, you know, what Silicon Valley did incredibly well is they built a product, you know, like let's take Apple for example, right? They built this iPhone. And then they built a whole ecosystem of peripheral,
Apps,
you know, hardware that goes around it.
app builder,
App
app
store,
companies, you know.
exactly. And then all the cell companies that, you know, all the cellular networks that now participate. And so they built this whole vibrant ecosystem that just keeps on feeding on itself, right? And B2B did this. The difference is they just didn't monetize. You know, let's take a plumbing company that manufactures, you know, plumbing equipment, or even a distributor that aggregates a bunch of suppliers of plumbing. You know, someone has to install that. And a lot of times these distributors are not saying, hey, Isaiah is a platinum certified plumber and Ryan is a gold certified plumber in your area. You know, why wouldn't you pay, you know, advertising or referral fee in a pay per order versus a pay per click, which right now, you know, businesses go to Google or they go to Yelp or they go to, you know, Angie's List to find these plumbers. And in reality, you know, if you're a business that sells that core good, why wouldn't you bring the ecosystem of players that, you know, are also qualified, highly qualified, to install your products and more trusted in my mind than
So how would
dumpster fire of going to a directory?
Can Nautical help them with this? How would they use Nautical or marketplace technology to do something like that or build this community, I guess, in a better way than they're doing it now? Like, I'm trying to be very specific of like what that would look
Oh
like.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the way we built Nautical was we built in a way to support really any type of marketplace. So you can think of marketplaces across 4 different, you know, categories. You've got product marketplaces, so this is physical goods. You've got digital marketplaces, think app stores, right? Or even, you know, like services where you're selling like
Content.
warranties or insurance, right? Yeah. Um, the the third type is service marketplaces. And then the last type of marketplace is a booking marketplace. Service marketplace being something like an Angie's List or something where
Yeah.
you're getting people or Thumbtack.
Yeah.
Um, the the fourth one is of course booking marketplaces, and this is like Airbnb, right? So
Yeah.
any one of these can be supported with Nautical's tech, you know, with varying degrees of completeness. But the key is that you can sell physical goods alongside services as well as, you know, digital content all in one at Nautical. And so, you know, this allows you to add up all of those, you know, labor resources that are certified and qualified to work on your core product, and potentially sell additional warranties or education, you know, or even inspector services, right? Because a lot of times if it's a commercial installation, you have to have an inspector go and look and quality check and sign off, you know, that it's okay before
Yeah.
you bring in like a city certificate.
I mean, even a simple example, you know, we're looking for a new washer dryer for actually a business, small business, but we're just buying it through like Home Depot because, right, like it's not like we have enough volume to justify getting some big distributor for that. But what they do a good job of is like the add-on services of
Yep.
removing, well, they'll add on specific parts that they think you need, which you can remove and whatnot. But also it's very simple in this use case, but they'll remove like the removal. So for an extra, whatever, $50-100, they'll come and take everything out and set it all up for you, which is like, I think probably for most people a no-brainer, because who's going to want to, like, you know, get rid of their old washer dryer for $50 on their own? You know, it's like not worth it. You know, so what you're, to your point, you think distributors are leaving a lot of money on the table by not adding these kind of marketplace services, and then they would be able to bring in these third-party service providers. So if they brought that add-on, right, that service add-on, it could be tied to the local person in that area, or what, it could be sort of like regional, or specific to location?
Yeah, we have a marketplace right now that uses geographic search within like, you can set the radius. You could say 5, 10, 1,500-mile radius. And it shows every bookable resource within that region, right? Within that area, that geographic box, if you will. And yes, that exact use case that you just mentioned is something that I think a lot of B2Bs are leaving money on the table. And again, this doesn't have to be a completeness of vision exercise, right? And I think that's the point of demarcation and education we're trying to kind of get out into the world of B2B is you can start with baby steps. You don't have to boil the ocean, right? So you can it's fantastic, but the path to that starts with the first step. And so, for me, that's partial digitization, right? Add a couple products, start adding a couple service providers around that product. Test it with, friends and family. Test it with, some known entities, some customers that are super close to you, with very high quality, let's say suppliers, and wholesalers or manufacturers.
Yeah.
And that's how you de-risk a project like this.
Let's go through. I think it's helpful for people to like talk through those use cases. So, and I'm going to try and imagine like if I'm trying to reduce headcount, or I think people don't like that word because they're like, oh, we're just getting rid of people, and that's where we lose some of the magic of this potential, or let's say repurpose or make those people more efficient by doing other things, right? I would imagine that onboarding vendors could be a very useful use case. I know for a fact, and this is a very simple use case that we see as a problem, is you're a distributor, you have, let's say 400 manufacturers, and you want to get all their product data. The problem is they're all going to give you product data in different formats. It's a mess, and then you have to go and spend a ton of time kind of like figuring out how to all make it your own one website. Could you use Nautical to have like a kind of like a standardized vendor onboarding process so that they have to follow like the same product data imports and like almost put a little bit of the work back on the manufacturer? Is that something that you see as a use case of? Because to me, that makes a lot of sense to say, hey, manufacturer A, I need your help here. Please use our software to sign up to do this the way that actually helps us, not just give us like a random spreadsheet.
Well, and I think you called it out perfectly, right? So two things. Let's first address the first part of that question is there's reticence to say you're going to let people go and create efficiency, but to your point, I believe it's reallocating them to higher value activities, right? So instead of those people doing, benign paperwork or, mundane tasks, what they're going to do is they may actually move to curating the catalog, right? And allocating resources to getting that information in. Where's the value in that? Well, you're expanding the breadth of your offerings. Your average order value is going to go up, right? So that means more money that you're generating. That's a higher value activity than someone just processing paperwork, right? When that can be, automated with a platform. And so, yes, the second part of that question is yes as well, because, to your point, if you put the onus back on the manufacturer or the supplier to actually curate and create content within your product information management system, in the product catalog, it does alleviate a little bit of headcount. Now, I don't want to say it's all rainbows and unicorns and it just magically is just going to work when you push it back to them. It still requires quality, and it still requires the standard that you want to communicate as a distributor to your customers, right? Your suppliers have a standard about how they communicate to you. Generally, you're the filter between that customer and supplier. The reason why they're not going to that supplier is because the way you present information, the way you understand that customer as a distributor. And so I still believe that there's value, and this is where that reallocation becomes very important, is it still going to require maybe 10 people In the new world, maybe not. Maybe it's 8, but those, maybe 6 of those get reallocated to higher value activities where they curate catalogs and they do more order fulfillment, vendor management, so that they can create a greater average order value, and or go out and curate, the service providers that you can additionally monetize.
So is it from just a very simplistic way of thinking about it, is the multi-vendor technology almost just a way for them, going back to just like basic business processes? Because I think that's what's lost in all this.
Yeah.
On tangent of like the VC money, I think people just throw so much money at all these things and they try and make cool things, but we forget that it's like at the end of the day, we're just trying to make things slightly more efficient and save time and maybe more fun if you're in entertainment, right? Or get product. And so from a business process perspective, it's like, it takes X manpower to try and onboard or manage a vendor and get their information onto your website or into your ERP or whatever. With marketplace technology, you should be able to do that theoretically faster. Is that kind of a good way about thinking about it, or how would you kind of describe that?
Absolutely, and standardize it, right? Get the data in a standard format so that's easily discoverable by the customer, right? At the end of the day, you're absolutely right, Isaiah. Your job in business is to solve problems. Doesn't matter what whiz bang technology you have, doesn't matter what terms you want to use. At the end of the day, you're solving problems, and people are paying you to solve their problems, right? Make them more efficient, accomplish their own goals and dreams and objectives. And so, marketplace technology fundamentally is really just digitization of the existing business process. And you as the business proprietor, you as the distributor, get to decide what level of that is going to be digitized. It doesn't have to be 100%. It could be 25%, it could be 50%. You could say, hey, we're going to do this in stages and hopefully get to 75% eventually. And at each one of these stages, there are clear points of demarcation where you can go in and say, hey, I clearly understand where I'm getting efficiencies. We should lean in there so we get more efficiencies. Or I can see where I'm getting more revenue. We should lean in here and get more revenue. And so the whole goal with enabling technology, like what we provide and what you guys provide, is really about creating levers, either efficiency or monetization levers, and giving you the flexibility to operate your business in a faster way.
So let's take I think we could probably spend the whole episode on just this, but I think it's actually really important because I'm sure so much time is lost on this that doesn't need to be lost. If you think about like the marketplace concept, or I guess nautical commerce technology or marketplace technology, really in some ways a simple way of thinking about it is like exposing the existing marketplace processes to the actual vendors, right? Because right now, so if I'm a distributor, and let's just keep up, I'm going to stay very specific in the distributor example. I have to get my distributor's information and manually put it into the ERP. They have no idea, like it's very behind the scenes, right? Like right now, the way it generally works is they're getting this information, putting it into the ERP somewhat manually. Maybe they have an integration with their ERP and their big suppliers, or there's some integration there, but it's generally pretty old school and manual. And then they're trying to kind of figure out how to also put that information onto their website. But with essentially what you guys are doing is helping them, is creating a tool to better facilitate that process. Is that a good way about thinking of it? It's like they're already managing a bunch of different vendors, but right now the tools they have are, the vendors can't even log into them really. Like they're not going to give like access to their vendor, like their ERP to their vendor, right? Or even the ecom platform, the traditional ecom platforms, right? You see where I'm going with this? Like they're these closed systems, yep, completely closed off to their whole vendors, right?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I look at our technology as the bridge between the ERP and the buying experience, right? Because the ERPs are generally not exposed to your customers, the procurement buyers, or the folks that you're actually selling your products to as a distributor. And so
Let me
we're the
add one thing to
bridge.
that as a
Yeah.
warning. Generally, the ones that have tried, where they've tried to build their e-com platforms, they generally haven't been great. The ERP companies, they're good building ERP software. They've generally been pretty bad about building buying experience, e-com software related experiences. So just throwing that out there, who's seen a lot of that, because they do technically have some in the market, but I've generally not seen it go very well. So
Yeah, and it's one of those kind of good enough situations, but you got to realize the personas and the profile of buyers has changed, right? The millennials now have the greatest buying power across all generations. That wasn't the case 3 to 5 years ago. 3 to 5 years ago is Gen Xers. Even a decade ago it was baby boomers for sure. And each one of these generations has gone through their own digital journey, right? Millennials were digital natives. I mean, they started out with a lot of digital stuff, right? And there's the next generation, which I call digital natives. They started with Facebook. They didn't know a world that didn't exist without cell phones. This concept that we actually had to use maps to get around, physical maps, right? And so the buyer persona is changing. And you asked, why would a distributor want to do this now? Well, the impetus is now so that you get in front of this new generation of buyers that are demanding more, what I would say, less friction ways to make purchases, right? In their jobs, right? Because they're doing this every day personally on marketplaces out there in the world, whether that's the Etsy's of the world or the Amazons or wherever they get their goods from. But at the end of the day, they want that same experience in B2B. And with approachable technology that can bridge that gap between the ERPs of yesteryear to the modern buying experience, that's why you'd want to embrace this kind of technology. And by the way, if you think about what a distributor does, a distributor's is sales-led growth. It's a fancy term that pretty much means it's very people intensive, where it's relational, which is not going to change. I don't see B2B changing dramatically in that way, but it generally isn't very digitally assisted, right? The difference between sales-led growth and what I call product-led growth is the Amazon experience, where you don't talk to anybody. You just go on there, you buy it, it just shows up in 2 days magically, right? Sales-led growth is, you may go in and clear a list for a request for quote, you push a button, and then maybe a salesperson calls you and says, hey, I just saw you put in an order for about 50 items. Hey, are you sure you want this part? Because, I know your project and it looks like this one's not compatible with what you're trying to match there, right? And so it's digitally assisted, where the salesperson actually still involved relationally in that sale, and the buyer has high confidence that they're looking out for them as a distributor, right? As an expert in their industry. But you've removed the friction of that salesperson being tied up on that single order. And this is where, Isaiah, what I said around the difference between digital assisted and sales-led growth is, if that salesperson is on a phone call, they can't take another phone call. They just can't. But if they take 3 quotes from 3 different customers and then call them back to kind of discuss it with them, you get higher throughput. And so this is where I think that, distributors have an opportunity to increase the throughput of orders.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And to your point, it's exposing this information better, one, to the customer and to potentially the vendors, to help the vendors do a better job working with you. Because I think a lot of manufacturers want to help their distributors. And I've talked, they want to facilitate the distributors, but sometimes they don't know how, or there's no tool for them to do that, right? They don't get access to the ERP. So all they can do is send them, the information that they have in whatever formats they have, right? And so, it's really interesting to think about it in these different ways. How would someone go about implementing, I think one of the reasons this kind of stuff does feel daunting for a lot of folks is do they need to completely blow up what they have, or could they roll out a piece of this on top of maybe a lot of these guys might already have some sort of e-commerce system. It's just not a marketplace, right? Maybe it's just a basic, you know, Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento, Unilog, SAP, whatever, you know, there's like 100 of these different e-com platforms. Would they have to completely re-platform, or could they add this functionality to what they already have? How would that potentially work?
Yeah, the best approach is really an embrace and extend. In my mind, this is embracing all the good work and integrations and technology assets that they've already implemented, and extend that with a capability that just doesn't exist, right? That these other platforms, lack a capability in. I think rip and replace model is disastrous. You don't want to do that. It just doesn't make sense because a lot of these systems do what they do well, and they do so many things that your view of it might be 10%, but it's doing something else that accompanies the other 90% or 50% or whatever of that software, right? And so it's always best to embrace and extend, and then eventually sunset if it makes sense. Eventually your CFO is going to come to you and say, "Hey, do you really need these two running at the same time?"
Yeah.
And so sunsetting eventually is smart, but not rip and replace. It doesn't work well unless there's some major security hole.
Yeah, or they had to anyways, right? Or if they were already. Where would you typically recommend that folks start? I know this is like, it's all going to depend, right? It depends on what their situation is, but what are some good starting points that maybe don't feel overwhelming for the average distributor?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that because I was just speaking with one the other day. They're a lighting distributor, and they just came to me and said, "Ryan, where do I start?" And what I've said to them is, well, what are you doing right now? And they take orders literally on pen and paper and Excel, with the customer, and they create this quote, and then it's multiple millions of dollars, and there's a bunch of negotiating back and forth, emails flying around. That's data. But it's in disparate data sources, right? It's sitting in email. It's not tracked. Some people might be using HubSpot or other kind of CRM systems to kind of quasi track it, but it's not in an order management system, and it's not actionable insights. And so what I recommended was they leverage Nautical in a way that allows them to just digitize the order internally. So they still take it over the phone. They enter it manually and partially digitize that order so that they start creating a canon, a record of data that they can actually look at and see if there's trends, so that they can sell back into similar type customers and buyers that may have needs around similar products, if you will. And so that's what I call kind of like the crawl phase, right? Is start internally first. How do you get your internal stakeholders to embrace digital, a small digital transformation by entering orders manually in a system?
So this could also
and
be
then
like
eventually
onboarding
get
new
to
vendors. Let's digitize onboarding new vendors, create a process for that. Same kind of concept, because it's an internal process.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And what that does is the value that creates is, first of all, your people are getting used to the system. So when you turn it on, it's not like three entities freaking out, right? Suppliers, the buyers, and your operators.
Yeah.
Your operators are already seasoned on the platform. Then you're going to have your suppliers seasoned because your vendor management function is going to do a little bit of curation, I think, in phase 2. And then you make product catalog discoverable, and you let customers start, doing self-service when it comes to, creating requests for quotes and stuff like that. That would go into your sales team, and your sales team, does digitally assisted sales. And I think
I'm just curious why. So were they not doing it in the ERP when they were taking these emails, or it did eventually get to the ERP, but it just wasn't a good tool to manage the sales process, or what? What other tools did they have? You said they might use HubSpot, or
the ERP was so dated and archaic that they didn't really want to touch it because it really just had an inventory of all of their catalog offerings based on the suppliers. And so really wasn't a good engine for order management. It really was more to keep a record,
It was like only like once the order was completed, like the final, then they would like record it in the system, basically.
Exactly.
So
Because the idea was it didn't have different states, right? It didn't have this concept of this is just a draft or this is just a
Yeah,
quote
yeah.
or this is, and it was like it had to be an order.
Negotiation,
If
right?
you
It's a
couldn't order,
draft order to negotiate, right? You start with this, it might change
exactly.
20% over time, or you might have
Yeah,
different variations of that until you get to the final version. It's almost like a proposal,
yeah,
right? But a proposal of products that's constantly changing, right? And so that makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting. I like the idea of I think that's a lot less scary for companies to say, like, hey, I could just start internally with like, what's a process that's probably really inefficient? What's our most inefficient process? Right. And how do we make that? That's where I would probably want to start, right? If you can make it better,
yeah,
obviously. So
yeah. I mean, eventually the goal is obviously create, a fully digitized, marketplace so that, you remove the friction to sell. Because at the end of the day, that's what you've got to do. You got to remove the friction to sell or to buy to the customer. And it's if you can do that, you're going to get greater throughput, especially if you're creating value. And you're going to get a shift in buyers from other distributors to you.
so how would you, and I think that all once again going to depend, but I think there's probably a lot of value for distributors being curated, being the knowledge experts of their industry. Do you think that most of them should take the approach of being almost like a closed, like an invite only marketplace where yes, they can sign up or they can apply through Nautical to be a new vendor, but it's not like Amazon where like anyone in the world can just go sign up and start selling product? Because I think that could get unwieldy for probably most distributors to manage quality control if just anyone can sign up and sell. So do you see it going more in the direction of curation and almost like an audit process, or what, I don't know what you would call it, right? But versus just wide open, anyone can sell.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. You know, what we're finding is a lot of the B2Bs are deciding to put like either the entire catalog behind a login wall or the pricing behind a login wall, right? And when they accept a buyer into the system, the buyer has to sign up, they have to register. Some of it might be automated; it just automatically shows them pricing. Others, they actually want to get to know the buyer and say, hey, I really want to understand what your needs are so I can actually maximize my value add as a distributor. To your point, distributors are experts, right? They're experts in what they do. They know what supplier and what part and what piece of equipment is going to be best for their use case, for their industry, for the region, for compliance, right? And that cannot be done in an Amazon way. It can't be done where someone just goes on and self-services, orders a piece of equipment that may have
Yeah.
commercial liability for the entire company.
Well, I'm talking about even on the vendor side, like because if they let any vendor come in, then all of a sudden they could be selling some shoddy product that.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. And so are you seeing that
Oh
where
yeah, you 100% need to curate vendors. Yeah, there's definitely and again, Nautical helps with this because what we do is when a vendor
how
signs
do
up,
you
you're in
help
a
with
pending state.
that?
Yeah, you're in a pending state, and then you can do diligence on them. You could do a KYV, which is a know your vendor. Just make sure that you know exactly who you're dealing with, because ultimately, if you're pushing money to them, that's different than traditional commerce, right? Traditional commerce, you're just receiving money, so your payment provider did diligence on you. If you're pushing money to them, you have to do diligence on each one of your suppliers and vendors to make sure that they're not a bad entity, if you will, or a bad actor. And so what we do is we help you with that state management, because once they sign up, they're in a pending state. You put them under contract, which is some legalese and commercials.
Yeah.
Each one can have their own contract, and then effectively you can approve them.
I would imagine there's a lot of opportunity to make that a better process for distributors through digitization, so they can take on more vendors that they trust. Because right now it's probably like the old model was you just kind of had to talk to people and kind of figure it out, right? Like there wasn't really many tools for that, right? I mean, at least that I'm aware of.
Oh, 100%. And if you think about it, Isaiah, this is where AI becomes very interesting because,
Yes.
like, look, if you have like a 12-point process to evaluate each one of your suppliers that wants to join you as a distributor, so you can effectively sell those products. Let's say you have a 12-point process, and 3 or 4 of those points are just looking for information to validate that the vendor is qualified to sell that product in market. You're able to push money to them. And then the other parts are quality measures, and then ultimately, just qualitative data where you're looking at, like what's the reputation of the vendor. You could probably say 25 or 30% of that is automatable, or AI could do that for you. And this is where that kind of technology really becomes interesting. But you can't do that unless the process is digitized. You can't start with AI if it isn't digitized. And so
yeah,
these are very pragmatic and practical ways where you're hearing these buzz terms, that can be somewhat intimidating, like AI. Well, AI in my mind is really, intelligent automation. And what it does is, it effectively goes out and says, okay, you've got a rubric. I'm going to follow that rubric. And as long as it passes, I'm going to flag it as green, yellow, red, orange, whatever you want to call it. And those go into exception queues, right?
yeah.
And if it's green, no big deal. It just hits, suppliers automatically approved. If it's yellow, maybe someone reviews it. Maybe they're conditional or provisional approval. If it's orange or red, maybe it requires manual intervention, right?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine by getting more efficient with all of this, getting the product data more standardized, it's probably going to become more and more important for distributors to get faster at onboarding and offboarding vendors, right? Because the market is so dynamic. New manufacturers are coming online. Maybe the ones that used to be good aren't as good anymore, right? And I feel like if you're not adapting to the marketplace and new products coming into the market, you're going to be, less and less relevant to someone that can adapt faster. Whoever is the one that can curate faster in the plumbing place is going to be the best plumbing distributor, plumbing supplies marketplace, right? And so it obviously depends on the category, right? But some categories I think are moving pretty fast,
Absolutely. And Digital Commerce 360 did a study. It was, I think, post-pandemic, and said that, if you had an e-commerce store in the pandemic and post-pandemic, you grew at about 40% year over year. If you had a marketplace, it was 80%. So it was double the rate of e-commerce. And what that showed that buyers wanted an aggregation point. They wanted to buy multiple things from a single provider that they trusted, versus going out and sourcing it. Even if there's price disparity, even if on the marketplace it's higher price than somewhere else, they're okay with that because they're getting it maybe from a single entity. And they can hold that entity accountable, right? They aren't tramped down 10 different vendors they're getting this stuff from. So to your point, Isaiah,
makes a lot of sense, right? Because let's say I paid you $100 more to get 10 items versus I could have gotten $100 less by individually buying it. I only need one record in my, we're a simpler business in that we just have QuickBooks in our, services business. So, I only need one QuickBooks record. I only need to reconcile one order versus, putting my payment info and getting 10 orders and reconcile 10, it might cost me more just to manage the 10 orders than that $100 I paid you more to do that, right? And so
100%. Yeah. Absolutely. And if you think of the opportunity cost, or at least the total cost of ownership of that solution or scenario where you think about hey, I'm going to order it from 10 different vendors. What happens if 4 of those products need to be returned and you have to adjudicate that with each one of those? You're sitting on the phone for hours trying to resolve it with each one. Whereas, if you had one entity that you were dealing with, you'd say, look, 4 of these things didn't work. I've got to get them resolved. It's probably, you're still going to probably spend an hour on the phone, but it's not going to be an hour each, business that you're kind of working through. And so, I think those are the reasons why you're seeing marketplaces grow, is because the average order value goes up. And that's a function of the buyer's expectations. Buyers just want more from the companies they love, and distributors are loved. Give your buyers more choice.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you're average. I think people underestimate the value of average order value. It's like this neglected metric. Everyone talks about, traffic, ROAS, return on investment on advertising and conversion rate. I feel like you hear very little about average order value, but it's
Yep.
theoretically just as important as conversion rate, right? Like you double your average order value, you double your sales, right? As long as your conversion
Exactly.
right? But people just kind of neglect it and forget about it. And also, I think it gives you a much bigger opportunity to do more marketing and more meaningful marketing and sales when you have a higher average order value.
Yeah, and we actually have stats around this, Isaiah. Average order value increases between 33 and 36% if you have a marketplace operating at scale, right? And so, think about that. You're having a greater breadth of products. You're increasing your revenue for all intents and purposes by 33 to 36%. That's meaningful. That's not 5% or 10%. And again, that's a stat that's independent. It's coming from companies like Digital Commerce 360. We recently commissioned a study with Forrester, and all of this data is independently verified.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I mean, that's a good way to say, hey, look, this is why, if it's going to cost you $1 million to get to scale of a marketplace, whatever, I'm making that number up. But if you can increase your average order value by just that metric, and then don't forget about all the other values of better vendor management, better product curation, maybe better conversion rate, whatever it is, just that metric, theoretically, your revenue could be up 33%, which, that could be $10 million or $20 million or whatever, obviously depends on where you're at as a business, but then it becomes a lot easier to justify ROI when you have, obviously it's always going to be per use case and per business, but you have something to build on there. Do you, we're kind of getting towards the end of time. Do you have any examples of a good, and I don't know if you're allowed to name them. If you are, great. If you can't, maybe you can just tell the story of a distributor that did the crawl, walk, run. So maybe they did the internal process, then they got to the net, and then they actually did get to scale, and they got to that 36%. And anyone that comes to mind as a
So
good...
I can't name names, but I can tell you the use case, right?
Yeah.
So we had a customer that had a very successful but very labor intensive business. He went through the proprietor. Went through at least 2 digital transformations. In the first digital transformation, there was 90 people helping him operate the business. In the first transformation, he was able to get it down to about 35, while also increasing the revenue, I believe, by at least 50%, if I'm not mistaken. And so, that was pretty remarkable, and that was implementing marketplace technology. The second phase, though, was to really remove the friction to buy and remove the labor or human element in the buying process. And so, he's more in the nascent phases of that. I think he's in the walk phase of this second digital transformation he's in. He is using nautical technology for this. But he's effectively taking a triple digit, business, triple digit million business, or 9-figure business, and he's effectively getting it to where, is he still going to need 30 or 40 people? Who knows? It might go down to 5 or 10, and that's pretty meaningful because you're able to do it with a lot less of labor footprint. And some people might look at that and say, wow, wait a minute, what's the impact of the people? Well, a lot of those tasks that they were doing were mundane, right? It was paperwork. It was just unnecessary double entry into 4 or 5 different systems. If you looked at his business model, he had one person entering it into, a tracking system for logistics. He had another person entering it into his order management system. He then had another person that would take that paperwork and enter it into the accounting system, because there wasn't really, integrations or a workflow that helped him, orchestrate his business. When he embraced Nautical, a lot of that became automated, right? And so then the question was, well, why do we need these 5 people doing this? So maybe 2 of those people went over to vendor management, right? Or 2 of those people went into quality control on, like how the vendors actually delivered. And he was able to increase business even in the walk phase, but also reduce that labor footprint. And again, it was organic. It wasn't like he let people go. It was just natural attrition, right? So as the jobs sunset, and he had some seasonal workers that would go off to college and stuff, he just didn't backfill those jobs.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty impressive to have a business run at that volume with such a low headcount. I would imagine this is a really good time for distributors to get into marketplace or technology. I almost think a better way to think about it is marketplace technology, because as we said before, they are sort of a marketplace. They just don't have any technology to run it as a marketplace, right? And so what do you see? It seems like we're probably mostly in the crawl walk phase, like which I think is an opportunity for distributors, because you don't want to be starting this when everyone's running along and you're just like way behind, right? And so I would imagine it's still an opportunity to be maybe not the earliest adopter, but an early to mid adopter, which is a good place to be, I think.
Yeah, Isaiah, you're spot on. We are definitely in the nascent phases of, if you kind of look at that maturity curve, we're definitely still in the innovator early adopter phase for distributors, embracing, what I call the right technology to orchestrate their business, right? To help facilitate their business. I will say this though, the trailblazers are going to have a leg up, even if they bump their head during the journey, because what they're going to get out of it is learnings. And those learnings are invaluable. Those are your tiger stripes. That's what made these business folks, really successful in the first place, is they found out where the landmines are. Don't step in that area, go this way. And to an extent, it's undocumented. You're just like, intuition, let's not go that way. And so that leg up gives them the ability to learn faster, and get to market quicker, which, I think, because people have asked me to opine about, what's the future of B2B, I do believe you're going to see some consolidation happening across B2B. And there's going to be folks that are doing the aggregating, and then there's going to be people that are aggregated, or businesses that are aggregated. And I think these early trailblazers that embrace this digital, technology, this enabling technology that's right for their business, are going to be in a better position to either defend against aggregation or be in a position to aggregate because of the efficiencies.
I agree.
And so, that's kind of my message out to the distributors is, there's never a good time to start, because we're always trying to, balance running a business with introducing new and necessary technology capabilities to keep the business viable. But I would say now, before the rest of the world realizes, oh, wait, I need to do this, it's better to be the one getting a head start, and trying to learn along the way, as opposed to being the laggard, to your point, and trying to catch up. Because by then, other businesses are going to erode at your margins, because they're already going to have this digital flywheel running.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. Sorry, I lost that. I had a good question and it already escaped me, because that was a good answer. And as we see this market, so now I know what it is. What do you think is resisting? A lot. I notice a lot of distributors in B2B, and just B2B in general, is like more resistant to a lot of these changes than sometimes what you see in B2C. I mean, I think B2C has evolved pretty fast with e-commerce, in the sense, I think they kind of got forced to, right, with Amazon. And now, I mean, if you don't do e-commerce as a B2C business, like that, generally most of them are on their second, third, fourth iteration of their website. And it's also easier, right? It's simpler. It's not as technology intensive, so it's usually easier to do. But it seems like B2B companies and distributors especially are like, maybe it's they've been burnt so many times, they've struggled with ERP, technology that sometimes isn't the best to deal with. They're very hesitant to dive into new technology. And what do you think? Do you think that's starting to change a little bit? Do you see some of that changing with the culture and obviously the times are forcing people to change, or do you think there's still resistance there?
Yeah, I think there's a two-part answer to that, right? First is, this old adage, I grew up in B2B, so it's kind of funny, we had this old adage is, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? It works, right? They're generating revenue, do you really need to do anything to fix it? Because introducing change is scary, right? It was interesting, and I'll use an anecdote. I met with a group of CIOs, and one of the gentlemen said, he was within a year of retirement, and we were talking about Nautical in his business, and he said, it is necessary. This technology. I mean, he recognized that this is going to be necessary. He said the challenge is, I'm worried that this could be a 2 to 3 year project. And I was trying to explain to him that it could be de-risked, where it could be launched within the first 90, 120 days, 180 days, if you have a very specific scope of how you want to do it and get the team seasoned in how to use it. And I think that's the reticence, right, Isaiah, is there's just not a good clarity around the time frame that it's going to take to implement, and is it a distraction to the core business?
Well, you know what?
And so, yeah, go ahead.
I think that the reason for that is because these businesses have built around ERP systems, distribution systems, and those ERPs did take potentially 2 years to implement, right? And
Yes.
so it's hard for them to envision this. I don't want to use agile too much because there's some aspect of waterfall, I believe, in all this, right? You need to get requirements, right? But in a more these new incremental technologies like Nautical or most of these web technologies, I think they're not familiar with that ability to say, hey, we can launch this feature in 3 months, the next one in 6 months, and iteratively improve, because I think ERPs were kind of an all or nothing system, right? And that's what they're used to. And it's like, you either have financial reporting and inventory, you don't. Like, you can't have half your financials and half your inventory. You know what I mean? It's like, it was a very all or nothing technology, and that's the technology they're comfortable with. And they're not really comfortable with even the e-commerce systems, or especially Nautical, that you can roll out in kind of phases. I don't know, that's just what I think has caused some of that hesitancy from my perspective. But I'm just curious if you think that could be part of why they've never experienced it. Right?
No, you're spot on. I mean, it's interesting because that gentleman that I mentioned earlier who'd done 2 digital transformations, the second time he came back and said, hey, Nautical, I have this new vision and I want to do these 3 phases. It was insane. The time frames he was asking to test the model were, I mean, it was even putting us a little nervous, because he wanted to show his customer a functioning marketplace in first 45 days. And again, that's hard, right?
Yeah,
we did it. And then he wanted to have incremental value added onto it in 60 days and then 90 days, right? And so this concept that you have to wait a year or 2 to get the perfect solution, that's not the right approach. The right approach is take a small piece of your business, and this is exactly what he did. He has many business lines, and what he did was he took a very specific vertical, and he brought it in and said, in the first 45, 60, and 90 days, these are the 3 points of demarcation to actually see if we can actually digitize this workflow and see if we can actually make this business line a candidate for full marketplacification. And he's already way past the 90-day mark, right? He's on the cusp of what I call the run phase, right? He's way past 180 days even, where he's out figuring out, okay, now we're doing biz dev to grow this business. And now we're starting to figure out all of these other business lines that are still being managed manually. How do we integrate that now into this marketplace model, right? And what that allowed him to do is it allowed him to do it in a capital efficient way. He de-risked it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important part. is you've got to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a process that distributors need to learn. I don't think that many of them are used to kind of incrementally rolling out technologies in the way that modern web, especially these like headless technologies and all. There's just so many ways to deliver quick, at least proof of concept type, things, and they're just not used to that, right? And so, especially when you're like on an on-prem, coming from an on-prem ERP system, has to be rolled out on every computer. It's hard to imagine like, hey, I can just I can deploy a new feature every week theoretically in the cloud, right? So maybe that's a takeaway for us, is how do we start kind of teaching that methodology or that process to more of the distributors. I think that's a missing part of this economy that needs to happen.
Yeah, I'm a big evangelist of what I call the crawl, walk, run approach. I actually have a fourth phase called rocket ship, because inevitably you have a bunch of people sitting at the table that have great ideas, and that's wonderful, because that shows vision, it shows completeness, it actually shows that they're bought into what this could be. But some of those ideas belong in the rocket ship phase, right? Way after.
I like that. It's more exciting too.
Yeah, exactly.
Running's not very fun, right, for most people, so rocket ship sounds a little more fun. So any last, how can people find you? What advice, what's your last kind of advice for people to, think about this journey, or maybe just start learning, I guess?
Yeah, you can connect directly with me on LinkedIn, Ryan Lee at Nautical Commerce. Email me, Ryan at nauticalcommerce.com, or visit our website. We'd love to walk you through how we've solved problems with it. Again, you can also talk to Trellis, and I'm sure Trellis would be more than happy to collaborate with Nautical on something as well.
Absolutely. And get the magazine, right, on the website. I assume they can
absolutely get the magazine. We got a lot of good thought leaders. I think you've got a piece in there, right?
Yeah, it'll be out. So you can listen to the podcast, and then when you get on your way to the office, then you can get the magazine there at the office and continue your learnings at the office. So Ryan, it was so great to have you. Love to have you back as the market change, a year from now, 2 years from now, it'll be like a whole new conversation, because you know how it is. The market will have matured even more,
100%. Well, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Isaiah. I appreciate it.